Respected brothers and sisters, it's gone into the 4th month of my being here, and we've had a busy Ramadan with activities in the masjid. But one of the most important objectives that I've been given has been one of educational reform. For the last 20 years at least, most of my time has actually been spent in Islamic education. And I think about 3 years or so was also as an Imam. But in both of my previous roles as an Imam as well, I felt like the primary thrust of my work was also in education. In one role it was maktab reform, so part-time Islamic educational reform, and the other was actually the role of being Imam of the masjid was secondary to the responsibility of establishing one of the first boys' Islamic secondary schools in Hamptons. And it was a couple of years afterwards that, having always been interested in higher education and post-16 education, and sort of what we loosely call nowadays Imam training, generally in the community sometimes we call it, Darul Uloom education, Islamic seminary education, etc. It was in 2002 that practical steps towards setting up Ibrahim College were taken. And then, I had 17, 18 years of that work. So education isn't something that I've gone into because I happen to have a background in education. I generally tend to work on the basis of this is needed, so I need to go into it. There is a problem, there is a gap, and that gap needs to be addressed. That tends to be the motivating factor. So I want to, now that Ramadan, we've got past Ramadan, and a lot of my work outside of leading Salah and so on is now going to be in looking at how we can come up with a good educational model at CMS. I want to, in addition to doing that work in the office and with brothers who are involved, I also want to engage the community. I want to talk to the community about education. And obviously we're talking about Islamic education. We have a decent enough education system in this country as far as our secular education is concerned. And I don't want to get into this whole conversation that some of you might have encountered about this dichotomy between secular and religious education and whether there should be a dichotomy and so on. And ideally, in an Islamic education delivered by Muslims, conceived of by Muslims and delivered by Muslims, there should be no dichotomy. But when you're a Muslim community that is a minority in a country that accommodates Muslims and welcomes Muslims, but is not an Islamic country, that dichotomy is a given. It exists because of the fact that you have a secular education system where our children go to study, their GCSEs and their A-levels and eventually, their higher education, in which there is really no particular interest in teaching religion other than almost as a form of anthropology. If those of you who have some ideas about the academic world and how it works, then Islam is studied really or Islam and Muslims are studied really as a subset of anthropology, Middle Eastern studies, or on the Orientalist model, right? So Muslims were studied as an Orientalist exercise, really ultimately serving the objectives of colonizers, to then slowly evolving after Edward Said's critique of Orientalism to becoming something that's a bit more accommodating of the Muslim perspective, of Muslim professors, Muslim lecturers, and so on. And that's pretty much where we are now. Other than that, there is only a tolerance of Islamic education in the space of communities wanted to set up their own frameworks of education, right? So therefore, that dichotomy of religious Islamic education and secular education is just a given. It exists, right? We can't escape it. So whenever you hear talk of there should be no dichotomy, all education should be Islamic, and and sciences and the humanities and the arts and all of that should be part of our Islamic education. This is all true, but in an ideal world, right? Which we're not in. So I want to therefore, given that therefore there is this dichotomy, the point I want to make is that really our children's secular education is taken care of. Unless you have millions of pounds, then I can show you a model whereby we can actually take command of our children's secular education as well, right? But even the people who have those millions, I know some of them, that is not an area they're willing to put money into. Okay, trust me, I've tried. So then we're left with priorities. So you send you guys have great grammar schools here in Chelmsford. You send your children there, and for the most part, with some extra tuition and so on and so forth, you hope for the best in terms of what they can achieve, whether it is a good career in some profession or other. I mean, certainly there's quite a number of you who choose medicine. I can see that, and then or whether it's the kind of the highlights kind of education of children going to Oxbridge or whatever it is, whatever our aspirations are, they're taken care of. So really, what's missing, what needs to be addressed is Islamic education. Islamic education in this country, in the country as a whole, let's forget Chelmsford for a second, in the country as a whole, exists within the Muslim space in the following formats, right? Obviously, this is a long conversation, and I'm going to keep talking about it. You guys are going to get really bored of it, right? But in the following formats, since the mid-70s, full-time residential Darul Uloom education. All right, the first institution of that kind, set up in 1975, roughly around 1975, was Darul Uloom Bury, right, in a place called Ramsbottom, right, in Bury, basically. I've visited, I've seen it. It is a big institution founded by Maulana Yusuf Mutala. And a lot of what we now have, there's a term coined called homegrown imams, right? i.e. imams who have been trained in this country. A big chunk of them, since the 70s nowadays, are from Darul Uloom Bury. In fact, our very own Hafid Abdul Qadir has studied there, for example, just to give you an idea of how connected Darul Uloom Bury graduates or alumni are in the Muslim community. Some of them are now established authors, public figures, and so on and so forth. The next Darul Uloom was the one that was set up in Dewsbury in 1982, right? Connected to the Tablighi Markaz. And then these two are still two of the biggest. And then after that, you had, various ones popping up. Not many in the south. The only one in the south is in Chislehurst in Kent. And then we've had lots of smaller models, and then some people shifted away from the residential model to a more day-based model, like Ibrahim College, like what we had in Ibrahim College, which is for all practical purposes a Darul Uloom because it runs the Islamic seminary program. Darul Ulooms generally are interested in producing people who are Hafiz and Alim. That is the thrust of Darul Uloom education, right? Essentially, they're producing imams, people who go on to become ulama, people like me. I studied in Dewsbury and in another seminary in Nottingham. I finished off back home in Bangladesh, and then at some point further down in the future, I did a master's in Islamic studies. So that's the kind of pathway, right? That's full-time. Then you have full-time Islamic schools that teach children their GCSEs, very rarely A-levels, and you have primary ones as well. So you have primary Islamic, full-time Islamic schools, full-time Islamic secondary schools, some Islamic secondary schools with also sixth form provision. These are private. The Darul Ulooms are private. These Islamic schools are private, and generally they're able to do a hybrid curriculum of the national curriculum as well as Islamic studies in terms of health and whatever they can squeeze in up to the age group that they're serving, right? But these are private, parents pay fees, and so on. And generally, the vast majority financially struggle. They just about get by. Because really, parents can't pay what it costs. There's only one Islamic school in the whole country that actually charges what it costs. Right? And that's Yusuf Islam School, Bronsbury College. Then you have government-funded Muslim schools. And there's different models of that. Right? But for the most part, the latest model that the government put out was the free school model. And in the free school model, you can have a Muslim ethos state school or a Muslim ethos free school, but you can't really have an Islamic curriculum in there. The curriculum is the national curriculum, but the ethos of the school can be informed by Islam, right? It's not perfect, but it's pretty decent. The most important value add of free schools is that the average private Islamic school has 150 kids. That's it. You will not find too many large private Islamic schools. The Darul Ulooms are bigger. The Darul Ulooms can have up to 500 students, right? But private Islamic schools set up day schools in localities, these primary schools and secondary schools, at best, they're single form entry, right? It's 20 to 30 students times 5. That's the whole school. Whereas if you have a free school, you can have up to 1,000, 1,500 kids, meaning a sizable chunk of that community, of your community, of the Muslim community, can be educated in that school, right? So therefore, a single Muslim ethos free school is the equivalent of 10 private Islamic schools, right? And there aren't too many of those, I can tell you now. But they're scattered all over the country. They're around, these free schools. Then, so that's the full-time Islamic education scene. Now, the only point I want to make today is this, right? So you've all got that, right? Okay. How many Muslims are there in this country? Let's say, generously speaking, about 4 million, right? About 5% of the population, okay? What percentage of the Muslim community's children, right, attend some sort of full-time Islamic education as I have just described?
0.1%.
0.1%. It's a bit more than that, all right? It's between 1 and 2%. It's between 1 and 2%. We don't have the capacity for more than that, right? We just haven't invested enough. It's 1 to 2%. So if there's 100 Muslim children, only 2 would have attended. Only 2, right? Max 2 on average would have attended some sort of full-time Islamic education. Whatever the benefits of that are, however good or bad that education is a separate conversation. Do you understand? Right. So therefore, from there you can imagine the impact of that at the grassroots level, right? The impact of full-time Islamic education to the number of people attending full-time Islamic education is disproportionately high. The impact is actually significant, even though the number of people that attend them isn't that significant. And there's only one logical reason for that, and that is the Darul Ulooms. Because the Darul Ulooms produce Imams, right? Imams serve the community from places from the pulpit, for the minbar. So therefore, they're producing high impact people. Each Imam, even if they're not particularly competent, they still have even a small congregation of children that they teach. So they have an impact on the community that is disproportionate to the number of children or young people that attend these institutions. Do you get that? You get that logic? Yes? So, but still, the grassroots impact is not substantial enough to say we have a religious Muslim community in Britain that is unparalleled. You know, the majority of people are religious and so on and so forth. When I say religious, I'm talking practicing the deen in terms of at least our fara'id, at least our obligations to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, right? And the truth is, the majority of us aren't doing that. Right? As difficult as it is to swallow, the majority of us aren't doing that. Right, so where are the majority of children going? Yeah, so right as I get to the crux of what I'm going to say, I'm going to finish and carry on later. The majority of Islamic education is provided through part-time means, right? So masjid-based maktabs, right? So in some communities we call them maktabs, in some communities we call them madrasas, right? They are basically Islamic supplementary schools. In big cities where there's lots of masajid, the popular model since the 80s, since the 70s and 80s, has been a kind of 5 to 7 Monday to Friday system, right? Then more recently, probably people like me had something to do with that. A more weekend-based model with less hours has been popularized. The idea being this is not a babysitting system where you just dump your kids kind of 5 to 7. Doesn't matter how efficiently the education is delivered. Actually, these kids need some rest, right? They need some rest. They need to chill a bit. They need to relax. They need to do their school homework, etc. They need to have some quality of life. So let's reduce the hours. Saturday, Sunday morning, make it a Saturday, Sunday school, right? Let them have their weekday evenings for their homework, for their rest, and so on and so forth. And these weekend models popped up and became really, really popular. That's what you have in Chelmsford, right? What percentage of the Muslim community's children do you think attend this type of education? Just rough guess. Just shout out numbers to me. Come on.
5 to 10%.
5 to 10%? 20%? What percentage of the Chelmsford community's children do you think attend some sort of part-time Islamic education? Now let me complete the picture. Weekend, evening, private tuition. Include the private tuition as well. Like parents are like, my children have to learn Salah from an alim, from a teacher. They have to learn Quran, right? And therefore we make provision. What percent? Quite high. Yes.
60 to 70%.
Exactly, quite high. Actual statistics don't exist. There is one organization I came across called Imam, who are in the Islamic curriculum scene, who've done some studies, right? And they said to me, it's about 70%, right? I think that's about right. Yes? Yeah. Now, after you've heard all of this, tell me, if we want reform, if we want change in the community, if we want to see deen in the community, a higher standard of deen, better salah, better Quran recitation, right? Better understanding of deen, better understanding of our priorities, maybe even production of better members of the community for the benefit of everyone, for the whole of society. Where should we concentrate our efforts in order to get an impact? Where the 70% are. Reform has to happen, although we need all of the other models. But if you want change filtered to impacting a large swathe of the community, particularly next generation, because it's young people that are here, then the ones that we have to reform are our part-time models. I'm talking about the whole of the country. I'm talking about the Muslim community as a whole. Now, 70% of our children going to these places is a strength. I think anybody in the world will tell you that. That's an amazing achievement. And this is an achievement of our elders, by the way. Young people, when I say young people, I mean people like me, right? Pay attention. Because our elders have achieved this. That is their achievement. It is not the achievement of the second, third generation. This is because of what they did that you have a maktab system that is now attended by 70% of the Muslim community's children. However, on the flip side, the majority of that education is not fit for purpose. The majority of that is not fit for purpose. Some 80% of it, and that's being generous. Wallahi, that is being generous. 80% of it is not fit for purpose. It is actually really bad. Does that make sense? Now do you understand, as a whole community, what one of our biggest challenges is? We have this amazing achievement that is not being realized to its full potential. All right? So that's the kind of, if there was one area where you want to concentrate your energy to have a huge impact on the next generation, right? Then that is it. And for some reason, despite this type of presentation, honestly, people don't get it. People don't get it. So I'm going to keep going on about it until the message gets through. So come to me, talk to me, right? Ask me questions, challenge whatever I've presented, and then if you're convinced, then ask how you can help. Yes? جزاكم الله خيرا. نقول قولي هذا واستغفر الله لي ولكم ولسائر المسلمين من كل ذنب فاستغفروه انه هو الغفور الرحيم.